Just call me Angel of the morning. Angel.
He needs a Highlander, one that comes with the sweet rear seat entertainment system.
Check out the new Highlander at Toyota.com.
From UFOs to ghost and psychic powers, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Here are the facts. International aid is a big business, and these days business is good. The United States alone provided $26 billion in aid in 2008. The U.S. also partners with other wealthy countries to provide aid through the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the United Nations. But there's a catch to these deals. List of conditions that must be met, like privatization of public goods and human rights legislation. Countries that don't want to play the game don't get the cash. At least, they couldn't until an alternative arrived. Enter China. With over 1.3 billion people, China is the world's most populous country. Nowadays, it's also one of the largest economies, and it does business with most of the nations on the planet. China has worked with African countries since the 1950s, trading cash and assistance for access to resources like copper, timber, and oil. Countries like Nigeria and Zimbabwe look favorably on this relationship and have grown closer to China as it proves itself a consistent and reliable source of income. The past decade has seen unparalleled Chinese investment in countries across Africa, from Guinea to Sudan. As China becomes increasingly influential on the African continent, many U.S. politicians and citizens are concerned about China's growing influence. Some believe that China is propping up corrupt governments. Others go a step farther and say that China is actually colonizing Africa. Here's where it gets crazy. Colonization might be an unfair word, but there's no denying that China is the primary economic force for several African nations. In 2007, journalist David Blair noted that China's African investments topped £30 billion over 2006. In Sudan, this money helped fund President Omar al-Bashir's ongoing war in Darfur. And Zimbabwe's president, Robert Mugabe, relies on aid from China to support his isolated regime. But to many political realists, the problem here is worse than human rights violations. Instead, they believe China is preparing for a future resource war. As the US and China scramble for access to a dwindling pool of oil, clean water, and metals, every commodity counts. Could it be possible that the Chinese government and businesses are making a long-term play, securing access to African resources for a future war? Skeptics have several problems with the idea of Chinese colonialism. First, Chinese government and business doesn't always act on a unified front, so it's impossible to assume that everyone has the same plan. Second, they argue that the concern is exaggerated. After all, the US is still one of Africa's biggest trading partners. Defenders of China's activities say that China must turn to Africa for resources because Western powers have locked down established supplies. According to the Chinese government, the Chinese approach to international aid and trade is a win-win situation for all countries because it emphasizes cooperation and prosperity without interfering in a country's internal activities, including, for example, human rights abuses. So who is correct? Is China expanding into Africa to benefit African countries and feed its growing demand for raw materials? Or is there something more? Long-term preparations for a coming war? Does China want to do business on this continent or to control it? Most importantly, how can we tell the difference?